say it's here for life. So keep that in mind as you're speaking. We are here today to discuss supporting childhood resiliency through a crisis and beyond. This is really about the mental health of our community, and most importantly, our children. Because of your generosity, the Community Foundation has a deep commitment to building resilient children. We've talked with you a lot about education, and many of you have heard me and others say that there are many levels to educating our children. Physical and mental well-being play a significant role in how a child can and will perform in school, as well as their overall success in life. We really want to provide the tools for our children to live out their full potential. I'm going to start with a few rather sobering statistics. 1 in 5 youth experience mental health issues in their life. Half of all chronic mental health issues begin by the age of 14. To give you some perspective, that's the end of middle school, beginning for high school for most children. Only half of children with mental health condition age 8 to 14 receive the services that they need. And the biggest barriers to those services, financial resources and transportation. There's good news though. The research shows that the #1 reason that people move beyond their trauma and their mental health is a relationship, someone to talk to, someone to help assess their pain, and someone to give them hope and tools to cope. That's what gets me excited about our topic for today, because I see the work and the progress that's being made in our community. I see a community that's recognizing the needs of our littlest learners, and I'm encouraged by the collaboration that's all around us. We hear about it every day. We have mental health evaluations going on. We have communities coming together to look at where the gaps are, to see how they can serve our youngest learners, our middle schoolers, our high schoolers, our parents and adults in the community. We have grassroots organizations like Sarasota Strong that are saying, we can do this together. We can do this by working with the people who are feeling the effects of mental health and lifting up their voices, bringing them to the table to have these conversations. Today, we have 4 dedicated professionals with us that give us a window into their experience, the challenges our children and families face, but also the hope and opportunities before us. Much of where we are today is because of the intentional work that these individuals and their organizations have been doing for several years. This doesn't happen overnight. This isn't happening because of a pandemic. The foundation is there and they're building upon it. And because of that, and because of the proactive approach, we see and we'll share with you some slivers of hope and resiliency in our community. Well, enough of my talking. You're here to hear from these experts. So let's say hello and introduce each of them to you. We have Dr. Laura Bakash, who is the co-founder of Inner Explorer. Dr. Bakash is an expert in mindfulness, and when you have the opportunity, I would encourage you to go visit her website and learn more about what they're doing. They have been instrumental within our school district, and now we're working with Laura and her team on a pilot within the early learning community. I'm going to, when we start talking with each individual, ask them to share something with us that we wouldn't read in their bio. So just reminding them that none of them told me in advance what that would be, but I did warn them that I would ask that question. Helen Neal Ali. Helen has a wonderful story, and we probably won't get to hear all of it today, but Helen has just an amazing perspective on what people are facing as they deal with mental health challenges and trauma. And Helen is part of Sarasota Strong, this grassroots effort. She has been working with adults in Newtown and public housing and has really helped them lift up their voice and understand what it means to work through your trauma and self-heal. Steve Royce is the famous principal and proud principal of Gosio Elementary School. We have had the privilege of working with Steve since he came on board, and I'll mess this up because I don't remember if it was 4 years ago or 5, but he'll correct me, I'm sure. And Steve has been really instrumental in innovative ideas to build, grow, improve the culture in his school to be very child focused. And that means looking at the whole child. And that means mental health, physical health, and well-being are paramount to the success that child will have and demonstrate academically in the school. Dr. Christie Skoglyn, I remember when I met Dr. Skoglyn, and she is an incredible woman with depth and breadth of understanding trauma and mental health in our children that far exceeds most professionals that I've interacted with. She's recently was announced as the CEO of the Florida Center after her predecessor, Catherine Shea, retired. And I cannot think of a better person to be sharing with you what our children are facing, but not in the past, in where we can go with that and what it means to actually bring the services to our children and what those services are and what we're seeing in our children and how we can build resiliency there. So without further ado, we are going to start our conversation. And I'm going to begin with Dr. Skoglyn. Christy, welcome, and thank you for joining us here today. Several years ago, the Florida Center was approached by Alta Vista Elementary School because they noticed that mental health, oh wait, I have to stop. You have to tell me something interesting about you that we wouldn't know in your bio.
I thought about this, sent it. I wasn't sure if we were going to do it or not, so I was toying around with a couple things, but I will share that there are a couple boring things. This one's not so boring. I love country music. I can't deny it. I love country music. I love Miranda Lambert and Jason Aldean. Oh, yay, my country music. Yeah, I'm a Floridian, and there's my other little tip. I squeezed 2 in there. So I don't know. Went to school in Mississippi. I love it. So.
All right. Are you going to sing some country music for us?
No, probably not. You wouldn't want to hear me sing.
But, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. It makes us a little human when we get to hear these pieces. Yeah. So back to what we were talking about, Alta Vista identified this, I think it was really, when it began, it was really a hypothesis. It was, we are sending out so many families, so many of our kids are getting mental health referrals and they're going unused. And so they, I think, approached the Florida Center and said, what could it look like if we brought a mental health therapist? Mm-hmm. And from that, the Florida Center was who they called, and this initiative has grown and grown. And I wonder if you could begin by talking to us a little bit about what that looked like from the Florida Center's standpoint and what you've really seen over the years as this initiative has grown.
Sure, yes, that's a great story that I love to tell. So I want to say it was in 2014. I received a communication from Dr. Shirley and just saying she's wondering if we could just have a chat. They were seeing so many mental health challenges within their elementary school, and of course I'm all for helping the kiddos. So we set up a meeting, and I remember her bringing in a lot of her team, and we met in the resource room, and she just kind of shared what they're experiencing, and it wasn't anything surprising. Here at the center, we deal with a lot of children in the community who are referred to us that have a lot of behavioral challenges and mental health challenges, family issues, those sorts of things. And she was just expressing the impact that it was having on the school, on the staff, on the families. They weren't quite sure what to do and how to help. And so we kind of talked a little bit about what we were willing to do and how we could do it. Of course, these things come, they're not free. You got to have money to do these things. And so we talked a little bit about what we could do. She had some discretionary dollars that she was willing to put toward it. And I believe it was 2015, we started out with one clinician over at Alta Vista. And then you and I communicated. Somehow you caught wind that we were over there at Alta Vista, and you called me and you're like, I got to hear about this. What's going on? And we just started a chat, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. We're having these conversations about what to do in the schools, and you had some initiatives at the schools already, and it just kind of grew from there. So we started talking about a pilot school, and I believe Goshio became our next school, and we placed someone there. So now we were helping 2 schools in our community with mental health needs. And then a few years later, I got a call from the district. Sonia Figueredo Alberts reached out to me. She had been at Goshio and had seen some of the work in action that was going on, and was just like, wow, we need this in every elementary school. And unfortunately, the Parkland shooting occurred, and that changed some things in our state regarding dollars that were put into the schools and looking at mental health within schools. So we were able to talk with the district about adding more schools. So they had enough initially to add, I think, 10 more schools, maybe it was 11. And then today, we actually have funding to be in every single elementary school. So that's 25 clinicians that started with just one.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So that's a great picture. But tell us about what that means. I mean, I imagine there's some people, and I'll put myself in this category a few years ago, you're talking about elementary school kids. You're talking about kindergartners are 5 years old, mm-hmm. 5th graders, oh, help me here, they're what, 10? Mm-hmm. So that seems really young.
Yeah.
We're not talking about preventing something here. We're talking about schools identifying real needs. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah. So Kirsten, this is certainly a journey. We're still on the journey. It's, my people know that I like to say this is a journey, not an event. This is going to take time. It was still in the process of making change, and then COVID hits, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But what that has looked like is really how to figure this out, how to make sure that we are, if you go to one school, you can see how that clinician is working with children and staff, and that it kind of looks the same in all of the schools. Granted, the school constellation and composition is different depending on the school, but we want to have some similar procedures in terms of how we help. Some of that is assisting, the teacher in the classroom. Some of that is teacher training, helping teachers who are saying, man, I'm stressed. Some of the mindfulness stuff that we're going to talk about here in a bit, because we really can't help students if we are feeling stressed. So helping teachers to recognize their triggers, helping teachers and staff to wonder more about what's going on, because behavior presented is to us is very triggering. It creates feeling. We're humans, right? We're triggered when a kid says something really awful to us, or when they are behaving in a way that we don't get, violent, aggressive behavior, those kinds of things. As humans, we have reactions to that, negative reactions. And if we're honest, it doesn't feel good. We don't like it. But how do we understand what's happening for us and also understand what's happening for that child so that we are able to respond in a way that is helpful, respond in a way that helps that child feel like they're understood, because we really are talking about relationship. We have to make sure that that if there's any message that I could get out there right now to all the schools, it's build relationships. And I know the schools know that. We've got to have relationships with children. Rules without relationships mean nothing. You can try to enforce a rule all day long, but if that child doesn't have a relationship with you that feels meaningful and solid and trustworthy and psychologically safe, it's not going to work. They're not going to follow your rules necessarily.
So bring me inside a school and to a child. When we say mental health or trauma-informed care, tell me what it looks like in a child. What are we seeing? How is a child brought into this program? Because we know that in a given school, there may be 500 students and you're working with a small population in that school.
Yes.
How are children identified? What are things that you're seeing and where are you taking that journey?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how many students are in a school. Steve can certainly speak to how many are at Goshio, but you think about the number of kids that are at a school and we have one clinician, one therapist, right? So they can't possibly serve every child that needs assistance. So we're looking at the children that really kind of bubble up to the surface and trying to help them. There's a process within the school. All of the schools where these children are referred. So it's not like someone can just say, hey, therapist, I need you to see this kid. There's a process because again, there's one person trying to serve children, families, teachers, community. It's a big job. So they're really trying to meet the needs of the child and wrap all of those other people around that as needed, because you've seen one child with a mental health challenge in a school and you've seen one child with a mental health challenge in a school. It's it's very individualized. You have to individualize it because that child's home circumstances are different. What they need in the classroom, do we understand organically, brain-wise, neurologically, what's going on? How are they learning? How are they impacted by their peers, their teacher? All of these things have to be considered. It's big. It's a lot to consider. And you think about what the schools have to do. It's like, hey, we have to teach kids and help them, learn. And wait, we have all this other stuff that we have to be experts in too. It's just, there's no way that any one person or system can be all things to all people. So having these clinicians with this expert knowledge, influencing that system in a way to help the school system, while yes, they are educators, to help them learn how in a way to rely on the clinician, to think differently, to reframe behavior. So it's, again, we've heard it a lot, but not what's wrong with you, what happened to you, what's going on.
Yes, what happened.
Wonder more about what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Christy, for sharing that. I want to move over to Steve Royce for a minute. And first I want to hear something about Steve that I don't know. So Steve, you are proud principal of Goshio Elementary. You have a lovely family. And what do you want to share with us?
Well, good morning, everybody. So I was thinking about this and reflecting as to something that you wouldn't know. So this goes back to my first teaching experience. So it was in West Seneca, New York. And the role that I was actually in a pre-K program and was partnered with a head 3-year-old teacher. And what I loved about that experience, and it's the only time I've ever seen this at schools, it was in a high poverty area, and the children were specifically identified as being behind, even in early childhood learning. And so what we did was we actually visited all of the students' homes and had dinner with all of the families. Mm. And it was just one of the most powerful things that I had ever done. I was in college coming out, and, for me, seeing that regardless of income, the most valuable resource for families is always their children. Mm-hmm. And so it was just such a powerful thing. And when we look at the work we've done, thanks to the Hensons with our early pre-K program, it's been great to see now at Goshio we're impacting that and the power of the early childhood here.
That's a great way to begin that actually gives me great insight to things that I know that you're doing. Gives me a fuller picture. Steve, at Goshio, Christy really painted a good picture for us of what this mental health therapist in the elementary schools looks like, the unintended consequences that are really beneficial teachers are getting access to ways to understand the children that they're teaching in a different way. You have been at Goshio, was I right, wrong, 4 years? How many years? 5, wow, time flies. And one of the things that I know I've seen in your time there is a change in the culture and the way your whole team is looking at children. But I'd love to hear from you what your perspective is around this piece of looking at the whole child and the environment that you've been in for 4 or 5 years, and now what you're seeing in this pandemic as it relates to your kids and mental health and their behaviors.
So Christy did a really good job of talking about the role of the mental health therapist. And, you know, here at the school, we can teach kids how to read and math. That's the training we've had. But when we would in the past respond to behavior, we always saw it as you respond. So because of the fact you act in a certain manner, there should be a consequence for that manner. And we never really got to the depth that we needed that our mental health therapists provide us. So we're getting a better understanding of children. And the nice part for that, I think, is as a school, it makes us more empathetic. And so we no longer just look at it as choice piece. We look at it as, okay, there's other variables that we may not be aware of. So one of the great things that we've seen with our mental health therapist has come in, and we've had, now we're on our second mental health therapist in the last 4 years. Our culture has changed. Our behavior has gotten better, even though it's a small group that is serviced. We have about 650 students on campus, and we're servicing around 30 to 35. That small percentage of students are our greatest need. And so it's been great to see the culture and the behavioral change that we're seeing on campus. I've had many teachers say this year, this is the best year they've had, which is incredible considering all of the conditions that are surrounding us. And it's really the way that we're dealing with our mental health issues.
So it's really interesting because you read a lot, you know, you really can't pick up the paper these days or, you know, listen to the news without hearing some kind of a effect that this pandemic is having on everyone, and it's stress. And we know intuitively stress is kind of contagious, right? If you're in a stressful, as a parent, if you feel stressed, your kids feel that. And I think the same goes true, it holds true in a school environment, right? Any environment we're in. And so the ability to work with the students that are very anxious, very stressed, you know, dealing with whatever they're bringing from home into the school, to be able to begin to dive into that and begin to have a relationship around that and give them tools to deal with it. I'm sure the other students benefit. I remember a conversation with Dr. Laura Kingsley when we were looking at this work and how do we measure the impact? And she said, you know, if there are 18 kids in a class and one of them has a need that that teacher can't meet, and you're able to take that kid out of the class and meet their needs, you've also just met the needs of 17 other children. And I think that was really powerful for me. You know, we talk a lot about results, and we want to not just look at outputs, we want to really know that we're having an effect. And I think sometimes we're so focused on that one individual or the 35 that are getting those supports, but we're forgetting about how those effects, the ripple effects, are actually felt in the bigger picture in the school. I think that's a really good point, Steve. Tell me, you've got an incredible population of students. Can you bring us into kind of what this looks like for maybe one child, something that you've seen, an experience that either you've had or someone on your team has had that kind of speaks to the level of challenges maybe some of your students are facing?
So I think back to one of the students that we've had, and it's just been interesting. The students, we've worked together since the student was a kindergartner. And that particular student really had some significant anger issues. You know, he was a regular ed student. We could see that he was a bright student, but just it was the anger piece. And, you know, we thought it was a choice of misbehavior in class to start with. Our mental health therapist really worked behind the scenes, and we began to see the social issues, the family issues. There was incarceration with the family. There was a lot of things that were happening with this child. and it just made things make a lot better sense. What's incredible is over the course of the 4 years, it's gotten better. What's nice is having that consistency of the therapist. The therapist knows that child and is able to really work with the family, work with the child over the years. We could forward ahead to pandemic 2020, we haven't seen the student in the office this year. The student now is in the top 2 academic performers in their grade level. Wow. And there's no issues. And the teacher kind of looks at us and I don't even know what you guys are talking about. And so it's just incredible to see the growth of that particular student. And I give credit for our mental health therapist, because we would have just responded with consequences and discipline instead of really going to the depth. The mental health therapist, again, made us more empathetic, which really has helped us as a school and be more successful long-term with the student.
That's amazing. I'm going to steal from Roxy right now and say that kind of gave me goosebumps. To hear you share that and to see the progress. And so I think what I'm hearing is something that I've read a lot about lately, and that is that, and Christy touched on this too, that one of the keys to helping our children is making sure that they have a stable relationship with someone that they can go to, and they're going to share when that trust is built, and they're going to feel, and that trust comes from being understood. So kind of being able to go in and hear from someone. And I know for years you had Jen, who was your mental health therapist. And we always talk about cloning Jen because she had this unbelievable ability to connect with kids on their level. And you cannot undervalue, you can't overvalue that, right? That is, for a child to feel that connection opens up this whole world for them to share and be able to share what their experiences are. So thank you for kind of bringing us into Goshio and the experiences. And I know you've got kids who are coming with a lot of traumatic experiences into your school, and they don't leave those at the door. They come with them and they follow them. So it is encouraging to hear how that's being identified. And we'll kind of get back to hopefully hear some more stories in a few minutes. I want to move over to Dr. Laura Bakash. Laura, tell us something about you that we won't find out when we Google you and read your bio.
Yeah, that's always a tough one. Everything is so much about mindfulness, but I will say that I have run a few marathons, and my dream was always to run the Boston Marathon. Because, I don't know, is there an echo that you can hear?
No, you sound fine.
Okay, good. So I ran the Boston Marathon a couple of years ago, and it turned out to be the worst weather that they had in decades. So there was 40-mile-an-hour driving winds, freezing rain, and I'm happy to say I finished. But not my best ever.
So we've just learned about you that you are physically and mentally sound. Got that piece in you as a marathon runner. It's always been a dream of mine, but I don't think it's going to happen. So about a year ago, probably a little bit more than that, actually it was several years ago, I remember talking to Dr. Christie Skoglyn, and she opened my eyes to, like, I said, Christie, if you could do something proactively with our kids, what would it be? And she said mindfulness. And she said giving them a tool to help them manage what they're feeling inside is so important. I would argue it is important for all of us. Mm-hmm. I think we're all pretty stressed right now, and having the tools to do that. Can you share with us a little bit about what mindfulness is and the work that you're kind of doing right now with students?
I think I was just muted, but I'm muting. So mindfulness is simply paying attention to the present moment. And it sounds very simple, but it actually takes a little bit of effort because we're so used to being drawn to all the buzzing and beeping that occurs in our lives. And so to stop and to be reflective inward is very challenging for a lot of people. So it's one of the reasons why we're really focused on helping children learn while they're young. It's a very important skill from the standpoint of focusing attention and reducing stress. So I would love, if I could, to invite you all to have a 1-minute experience. So it's kind of the middle of the morning. You've all probably done a lot of things already. So if you'd be willing to play along with me, I will give you a direct experience. So I'll invite you now to simply close your eyes or look downward, and I'm going to join in with you. And just begin by taking a slow and deep breath at your own pace. Just sensing the movement of the air as it goes in and out of your body. I'm just continuing to breathe as you settle in to this moment right now. Aware of the seat that you're sitting on, or if you're standing, aware of the ground that you're standing on. Just bringing your focus to that connection point, to whatever is supporting you right now. Maybe noticing movement as you breathe. Maybe your abdomen is expanding and contracting with each breath. Maybe the shoulders or the chest are moving. Just tuning into the body. On your next breath in, shifting your attention now to your shoulders, aware if they're elevated up towards your ears or if they're low and relaxed. Just breathing and allowing your neck and your shoulders to feel relaxed. Now just taking one more slow and deep breath in and out, and then opening your eyes whenever you're ready. So that was mindfulness. Simple, right? It's not scary. It's not unusual. It's really just a human capacity to pay attention. And it turns out that it's really, really powerful. So imagine every child in our district, every child around the world, frankly, starting their day like this, settling, breathing, focusing. And it turns out that the body responds in really positive ways to this kind of practice. So we know from about 40 years of scientific research and 7,000 studies and counting that mindfulness reduces stress significantly. So the next time you have a moment where you're triggered, you will be less triggered if you practice mindfulness. You will be less likely to respond in ways that are sort of detrimental. And this is really important for children because they start to learn how to regulate themselves, how to develop coping skills in the face of the challenges that might be present in their lives. The other thing that mindfulness does is it improves thinking. So we have an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, and a lot of neuroscientific studies have shown us that the prefrontal cortex increases in size and function. So these are studies done at top universities like USF and University of Miami and Harvard and Yale. So, imagine that there's a robust amount of information that shows the brain and the body have improvements as a result of this practice. So mindfulness is simple, and Inner Explorer's effort is to bring it into schools and into early learning centers as easily as possible so that teachers and kids can practice together.
So I had this experience about 2 years ago with Roxy, our CEO, and I said to her, you are never stressed. And she looked at me and she said, oh, no, I'm not. But she said, but when I feel it coming on, I go into my office and I take deep breaths. And I think that's, at the moment, it didn't really sound that profound until I started doing it and we all just experienced it. It really does change our whole perspective. But where I'm struggling a little bit, and I wonder if you could speak to this, when I think about our littlest learners, I think about the little boy who lives across the street from me, who's 3 years old and never stops moving. And I'm thinking, you're now working within the Early Learning Coalition in these early learning sites. Tell me briefly what mindfulness looks like in a 3-year-old who can't sit still.
That's a great question. So it's actually pretty remarkable when centers get started. Within a couple of weeks, you see a massive change. So what happens initially is the teacher would log in and he or she would press play on the program. It's audio guided. So the very first instruction, like we just joined in together, is closing your eyes or looking downward and starting to be reflective inward. The languaging, of course, is focused for younger children in that version of the program. And so kids will sit, and for the first week or two, they might be a little squirrely, they might be looking around, but within 2 weeks, those kids come right in, especially if there's a set time, which is what we recommend, do it right after lunch or right after recess. If there's a set time, the kids will walk right in. During that time, they will sit down and they will be ready to go, and you will hear a pin drop if you walk into a building that's doing it. We just finished a study at Head Start centers in Pinellas County. So we did a research project with USF, and what they found, and this is even, it got cut short because of the pandemic. So all the kids were gone and at the end of, or in March, but even with that program getting cut short, the researchers found that teacher stress was significantly reduced just by listening to a 5-minute program designed for little kids. They also found that secondary stress or traumatic, they call it secondary trauma, was reduced in teachers. So Christy, I think you mentioned this where, you have a bunch of kids walking in and there are a lot of them that may have trauma. And as an educator in the room, you're sort of taking that in every day. So that was significantly reduced. And then maybe the most impactful thing is that the children had improved executive function. So they did a neurological assessment. And then they showed that. So even kids as young as 3, and from, Head Start environments that are often, those children are living with other challenges usually. So to improve the outcomes in such a short time is pretty profound.
So it really is a very preventative, proactive approach to providing a tool, a free tool, to all of us, and just being able to pause and take a deep breath to kind of reframe where our mind is. And obviously oxygen to the brain helps too.
Exactly.
We're not getting that oxygen.
A couple of really important points just so that the listeners and viewers understand. So mindfulness, as I showed you, is just kind of a simple practice, but there's a protocol or a pathway or a sequence that we bring children and educators through. So think of mindfulness a little bit more like teeth brushing. So it's a practice that you do every day. And you mentioned this, Kristen, it's preventative. So you don't necessarily pick up your toothbrush when you have a cavity. You brush your teeth every day to avoid cavities. And what's amazing about what's happening here in Sarasota is that the school districts have this program in every school, thanks to the Community Foundation of Sarasota donors and thanks to the Barancic Foundation. And then, as you pointed out, many of the VPK centers through your grant are getting access to this as well. So we're broadening it throughout the community. And educators practice with the students, whether they're remote or in person, and families can opt in and listen to the same practice at home or work. So now we're bridging these stress reduction practices into the homes. And as you pointed out, when families get tools that they can use as well, they now have a shared experience with their child. It just creates this virtuous cycle that continues to sort of expand. And then the last point is just that this is, because it's preventative, if 30 or 40 or 50 kids are being sort of, the acute needs are being handled by the mental health professionals in the school, this touches all the rest and provides them with some useful ways to develop resiliency and coping, to be able to work on those skills. And then hopefully the team of mental health professionals can continue to really dive into those with the most, acute issues.
Thank you. That's great. And that's actually a great way for us to bring Helen into the conversation, who is working so much with adults in our community, and not just any adults who have had a lot of trauma Helen, share something briefly with us about you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. One thing about me is that when I was young, I was a drag racer. I had what was a 1961 Ford Mustang 5-speed. So I wrecked it, and my parents gave me another Mustang, but it was a 1969 that only went about 40 miles an hour. They slowed it down. So
They slowed you way down.
Yeah, my career didn't last very long at all.
Well, tell us, Helen, a little bit about what you're doing. You are working with adults, many who are parents in our community predominantly, but I know you've worked all over through Sarasota Strong, really working on self-healing. And you've, I think in the past year, almost just under 150 participants. The pandemic has changed things a little bit, but really helping these individuals let go of a traumatic past. And we know that so many of the parents of these children have traumatic pasts. Tell us what you're learning and kind of what you're seeing in the community with these adults you're working with.
Okay, what I'm seeing in the community, I've been working in Newtown, and when I first started out, I started with a group of ladies that kind of really kicked it off. And they were holding on to things that had happened to them in the past. They were holding on to maybe they had been sexually abused in the past, or they were living in relationships that were unhealthy. Domestic violence was a lot of the things and issues that they were working with. But what I've done, what I've learned myself, and what I'm sharing with them is not what we think, but how we think, and how sometimes holding on to past hurts and traumatic things that happened to us in the past affect us in the future. It affects us in the now, and it affects us mentally, where we're getting stressed out, where we're getting panic attacks, or this was going on. And all I did coming into the community was share people with not what we think, but how we think. So when we recognize when we're having a negative thought, we have negative feelings, and that just takes us all over the place. So you can imagine having a parent at home who's not happy or stressed out. What is affecting that kid? The kids all are getting that kind of abuse, or they're seeing it. They may not even be getting it. They may be visualizing and seeing it, and that affects their behavior. So I saw these first 8 ladies that we first started out with change so much. We were at the Community Bible Church in Newtown, and we were working with a group of ladies. They changed so much that the husbands wanted a group. And then we got into, I was already doing some work in Sarasota housing with the, not only with Sarasota Strong, but with another organization, and they just kind of slipped my mind, but I was working with them. I was seeing women in the housing authority. We were having a group, and they were filling out, well, maybe I need to not be in this relationship. Maybe they were getting better, and then they had more time for their children. You know, if the parent is more healthy, the child will be more healthy, you know, mentally. Yeah.
It's super important. As you've done this work, how have you found the women and the men that you're working with? How have they found you? And it sounds like what you're able to do is really similar to what we see that's going on in the schools, where we have Christy and Dr. Bakat, you know, they're bringing the services into the schools. Steve, bringing those services to the kids. You are actually, you're going out and you're finding these women, or they're finding you. What does that look like?
Well, I'm going into the churches, and we're getting a lot of referrals. If I go one place, they'll say, well, you know, this church, I think we've been to maybe like 4 churches so far. I've done maybe even 6 different sessions. It's been by word of mouth that they will tell someone else, wow, you really need to hear this understanding. And now we have, with our website and everything that we have listed our upcoming events and the things that we have going. We have also forums that we've been doing in the community that kind of have led us out there. We got forums in Venice as well as in Sarasota that we do once a month. Those forums have opened the doors where other agencies and teachers and all have come aboard, and that's kind of how we've been able to spread and go faster.
And I think one of the things that you're really honing in on as you're talking about this, and really all of us, a thread that weaves through this didn't start yesterday, right? Work is building a foundation. And as a result of that, the word mental health doesn't have this same negative stigma
Exactly.
there, but I think it's lessening. Would you say that? It's lessening. People are not afraid to come and talk with you.
Right, exactly. Because I myself was a product of mental illness. Of being in a domestic violent relationship that ended me homeless with 2 kids, and coming out having to have having panic attacks, and ended up in mental illness. When I learned the understanding that I'm sharing now with people, I learned that a 4-day training changed my life. I was having what you call a 38-year pity party because I grew up in domestic violence. I got in those relationships. I thought that was the norm. And that's what I think is people are seeing. A lot of stuff that they grew up with, they thought was norm, that led them to the mental illness kind of per se, or the behavior, I'll say, of demonstrating mental illness. But when I went to this class, I was like, oh, it's my thinking, you know. And what the lady said, one thing to me that changed my life. She said, think about that person. When is the last time that he did that to you? And I was so proud. I was like, oh, 1991. And she said, well, you do know this 1996. Who's been doing it to you for these last 5 years? I mean, Kristen, it was just amazing. I was like, oh, it's me. That person's not doing it. So even teaching people how to live in the now, live in the present. So far, a lot of people are still living in the past. And that's where the healing comes. When we realize that we can start every day as a brand new day. Whatever happened yesterday is just yesterday's stuff. And that's where I'm seeing people transform, because they're understanding how they're thinking, and they're choosing, you know, which way they want to go, which thoughts I want to entertain, you know.
And I think an important piece of what you're saying is that the message is getting carried out by individuals who are being affected and influenced by the conversations that they're having with you. They're sharing that with others. And it's, I think, as we think back to the beginning of this hour and the conversations about kids, we're wanting to give them tools that we hope they'll use, and over time they'll share with others. And it will bring about these proactive preventative measures within our community. I want to spend these last few minutes kind of talking about 2 things, and I want you guys to jump in here and just have a conversation together. I know that's a little hard on Zoom, but let's give it our all here. What do you see, like, what do we need more of in our community? Do we need more money? Do we need more collaboration? Do we need more services? Steve, what do you think? What do we need more of?
You know, we're incredibly blessed because of the fact we have such a generous community. And, you know, having been a principal previously in Manatee and Sarasota, I've always been very thankful and overwhelmed by the generosity in the community. For the purpose that we're talking about with mental health, you know, I think we talked a little bit about earlier, specifically in your Title I high poverty schools, the need is great. There's a lot of kids coming in with a lot of baggage. And so, you know, we're servicing, you know, 30 to 35 kids at about 650, you know, that's about a 5% service rate. And so looking at additional potentially mental health therapists in Title I schools probably would be a wise thing. You know, what we're seeing with COVID is, you know, there's a lot coming in the door from the outside. The kids have been amazing because of the fact they've really appreciated school, because over the years, we've always taken school for granted. And that relationship, as you had mentioned earlier, is strong. So our kids have been amazing, but being able to really help to provide services to students and families, I think additional mental health therapists in Title I schools in particular, I think would be a very wise, no pressure, Christy, but that's kind of, I think would be very helpful for us.
Okay. And Dr. Bakash, what do you think? What do we need?
So from my standpoint, looking just kind of out broadly, we really need to work on prevention. You know, I use the teeth brushing example all the time. 100 years ago, no one brushed their teeth and people's teeth were falling out. There was decay, there was cavities, and people were in pain, had trouble eating. I mean, it sounds silly, but there are really big problems when that happens. We're in a mental health crisis today, similar to the dental health crisis 100 years ago. And the biggest issue is really awareness. So if you imagine in 5 or 10 minutes a day, every day with every student, if that would reduce the mental health issues in children by 30% almost overnight. And that's been study after study. Less depression, less anxiety, less suicide ideation, less self-harm, and the list goes on and on. There's so much more evidence about mindfulness than there is about teeth brushing, frankly. So I jokingly always say, well, if you only have 5 minutes, do mindfulness and not teeth brushing, because at least you can get fake teeth if they happen to fall out. It's hard to do that with the brain. So I just feel like it's a longer term investment. And as Christy said, these things don't happen overnight, but with that kind of investment, and Sarasota is ahead of the pack here. And from a national standpoint, we're a national organization. You guys are doing really, really well. So that I think universally is needed, and for all kids. And we'll see very quickly a massive shift in all those things that I mentioned.
Helen, what do you think we need more of?
Okay, I think as Zuan knows, letting go of a traumatic past workshops. I had several over the summer, teachers that came mainly from, a lot of them more were from Manatee, I think, the schools, but they were saying, can you come to our class? I think even what I teach and what I'm sharing with people, how they think, if teachers can see that and be maybe able to, maybe some funding can come where they can be educated on this, it would help them work better with the students, as well with each other, as well with the parents, maybe even kind of seeing those signs when something's going on, and they can maybe help and share it with the parents. Maybe there's something that can be put out for parents to have, because I know when I got healthier, my kids got healthier.
Yes, that's
my whole house got healthier. We were, I mean, and that just filters. I just think this needs to know. I'm glad that I was chosen, that someone saw and say, because I kept saying, I have this thinking going on. And this lady said, well, I want you to go to this workshop. I am so glad I went to that 4-day workshop that changed my life 24 years ago. If someone could get that opportunity to get that, and I didn't have to pay for it. It was donated to me by a foundation as well. I mean, if some people could get to know what I know, and it would just make their whole lives better. So I think it's funding and getting it out there, getting to the people that really need it.
Thank you, Helen. Dr. Skoglyn, what do you think?
This is a really big question, so it's hard to sum it up in a short sentence, but I will say that, I mentioned earlier, it isn't all about money, but you can't do it without the dollars to support the work. And, while I don't know that we don't need more services in our community, we very well, I'm sure there are things that we need. There are holes and gaps in services in our community for sure. But by and large, the dollars need to go to enhancing the existing services, providing investments for the things that are hard to come by. The things, with mental health services, if any of you understand what it's like to provide those services, there are very few things that you can bill an insurance company for and get paid. The rest of it is unfunded. So how are we going to train teachers when there's no dollar to support teacher training? How are we going to consult with parents and teachers when there's no dollar to support consultation services? How are we going to do that in preschools? There's so much training, making sure that we have an adequately trained workforce. Mental health profession, by and large, there are so many ethical breaches, and I'm a mental health professional. I've been licensed since 2000. And anyone can go get a mental health degree and hang up a shingle and say, I can provide services for any child 0 to 90. But if you don't have the proper training, it's no good. And so how are we making sure that we are adequately training the workforce to work with the population that they're working with? It's very different to treat an elementary age child than it is to treat the parent, than it is to treat a teenager. You have to understand that, and training is so important. But that's something that's really expensive, and a lot of nonprofits and even those in private practice struggle to afford. So those kinds of things, investing in enhancing the existing services, is something that comes to mind a lot. And of course, changes at the state level as it relates to mental health support.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for your time today, but I think more than anything, your dedication to making a difference in the lives of everyone that you touch. Today it was a lot about children, but you all have teams of people that you touch and other community members. And on behalf of our board and our staff, I want to thank all of you, our donors, for making this work possible. I hope this opened your eyes to what's going on in the community and what the work that still has to be done, but not letting go of the foundation and the commitment that's already here that is really showing signs of resiliency. And I am going to call on Steve to say the last words, and I'm going to ask for, leave us on a positive note. You told us about that young boy, and that was great. Can you give us one more just glimpse where we can all imagine seeing a child and just some great impact that you have seen that will just have us all walk away and say, this is working? And I am totally putting you on the spot, but I know it's gonna come through for me.
So I'll even refer to where we are today. You know, going into this school year, you know, I talked to my assistant principal in the summertime and I said, you know, buckle up, it's going to be probably one of the craziest years we've ever had. And as we've come into the year, the most surprising thing has been the resiliency of our children and the way that they have acted in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Children are wearing masks, they're following the rules. And teacher after teacher say, this is the best year ever. And in the back of my mind for the first 2 months, I'm like, I don't understand why. There's so much on the outside that's attacking us. There's so much out there from a stressing standpoint. How do we, you know, what is this about? But what I've learned and, you know, over the last couple months is this: children are resilient and can accomplish so much more than we ever imagined. As adults, I have 20 years of educational experience and I was completely wrong as to what I was going to see this year. So the children are our future. And I can tell you, they can handle a lot of stuff and the future is extremely bright. I want to thank the Community Foundation for taking the time to do this, because mental health is one of those taboo issues, and having the ability to have conversations like this creates awareness and it's impactful. So thank you, donors. Thank you everyone for the time. And again, trust in our kids. I didn't have the greatest level of trust coming in this year. I expected a lot, but they've outperformed. And so we've got great hope in our future.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. We didn't get a lot of questions from our audience, but I would encourage all of you to send us questions. You can email us at impact@cfsarasota.org. You can call me, go to our website. There's plenty of people to contact, but we want to hear from you. We want to know what more you want to learn, who we can connect you with, how we can continue to bring you kind of valuable conversations around what's going on in our community. So thank you all for being here with us today. I hope we're all walking away saying, not that we've got this, but that we're on a journey together, that this community is coming together collaboratively to meet the needs of the people who are going to be our future. And those are our kids, from our littlest learners through our teenage and early adult years to parenting. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.